Today's panel, we're talking about the evolution of business for good, moving towards an inclusive economy. We are sharing as we move towards the vision and expectation that racial and social justice is centered in the creation of the new and next economy. Manifesting a just economy requires going beyond the aspirational and collapsing on all systems of oppression, enveloping the truth that collective liberation is attainable and will be our reality. So with that, my name is David Jackson. I'm an Oakland native who loves our dear city to its core. I'm a lover of people, an entrepreneur, and have a life commitment to the freedom and advancement of the Black diaspora. I currently serve as the CEO of Evolve Oakland, also co-founder of the Dismantle Collective, where our primary objective is to name, disrupt, and ultimately eradicate white supremacy. Welcome all. Also, we have this, I just have to say before we go into names, I'm so honored, I'm nervous. And I've done panels and all of that kind of stuff before, but like this is what I call the Mount Rushmore of this conversation. So I have to set that right now. And I'm going to start with the Dr. Diane Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a national expert in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, conscious capitalism, and values-based business, community engagement, cross-sector partnerships, and a host of other expertise. Diane has worked with thousands of leaders and organizations and has presented at a plethora of large gatherings and events, including the prestigious South by Southwest. Welcome, Diane. We have Andrea Walker. Andrea Walker is CEO of Recruitique and also the CMO of Educate Mortgage. She's a storyteller, strategist, recruiter, and digital marketing expert working in the community banking industry for over 13 years. Currently, Andrea oversees marketing, communications, and recruiting at Educate Mortgage, a wholesale brokerage empowering borrowers to find their perfect home. Welcome, Andrea. And we have Johanna Lyman. Johanna is a dynamic, energetic leadership and culture coach and consultant with nearly 30 years of experience of leadership development and culture change. She believes that inclusion and diversity should be seen as the natural outcomes of building great cultures. Welcome, Johanna. And last but certainly not least, we have Kat Taylor. Kat Taylor works in service of restoring social justice and environmental well-being to build a more equitable and inclusive world. Currently, she serves as co-founder and board chair of Beneficial State Bank, a community development financial institution and certified B Corporation whose mission is to bring beneficial banking to low-income communities in an economically and environmentally sustainable manner and to change the banking system for good. Welcome to all our panelists. Thank you all for being here. And so I want to jump right in. And so there are a couple questions that are teed up, and then there are a few that I'm sure we'll have fun with during our time together. Toward the end, we'll have a call to action, and hopefully there'll be some questions in the chat that we can jump around with as well. First, as a B Corp leader and co-founder of Hella Social Impact, Lynn Johnson recently shared, and I quote, "Last I checked, structural racism and white supremacy were very much alive and well, and folks are looking to businesses now more than ever to address these issues and be part of the solution." Andrea, can you take this first one? Can you tell us what a certified B Corporation is and what B Corps are part of the solution? Which ones, what are they doing?
Yeah.
And after, I'd like the panel to weigh in on your businesses and how you address these issues.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I have a little bit of echo. Do you hear that, or is it just me?
I can hear the echo.
You can hear the echo?
You're good on my end.
Yeah? Okay. I think the echo's gone. Okay, maybe it was you guys muting. Perfect. I don't know how that works, but it worked. All right. Thank you, David, for that lovely introduction. Andrea Walker. I have spent most of my years working with Kat Taylor at Beneficial State Bank, certified B Corp. So, this particular question is something that I've got to work on at Beneficial State Bank for so many years and really near and dear to me. So certified B corporations are businesses that meet the highest standard of verified social and environmental performance, public transparency, legal accountability. At the end of it, just always balancing profit with purpose. So there's many organizations within the B Corp community that are doing just this and bringing it to life. B Corps are accelerating a global cultural shift to redefine success in business and build a more inclusive and sustainable economy. So we would expect that this community of folks is at the forefront of everything we've been talking about today. And I can say that so many of them are, and it's very exciting. I think that one of the most exciting pieces where I hope we will continue to do is not just try and dismantle these things, but talk about our struggles in the process of doing it, because none of us are perfect. None of us are where we would want to be, but we're all along the journey together. And no matter how brilliant we are, there's always something to learn, because we only have our own individual lived experiences. So a couple of B Corps that are actually helping their particular clients do just this are consulting agencies like Provoke, cultural firm, and I'll drop all of these links in the chat next. Sweet Livity, which is another firm that supports clients on a diverse cultural spectrum. There's TMI Consulting. Johanna is the co-author of the B Corp, the second edition of the B Corp Handbook, which is a great read. And then, like David mentioned, Lynn Johnson of Hello Social Impact, based right here in the Bay Area, dismantling, just started this year, but doing the great work to dismantle white supremacy and beyond. And then you have organizations like Ben and Jerry's, who wears their values on their sleeves. And really, I think we probably all have heard Ben and Jerry say that really they're just using ice cream as a mechanism to solve all of these huge problems that we are all facing. And then there's folks like Rubicon Bakery that has an open hiring practice. So you're really just putting more and different people in charge, really focusing on how they can use their particular product to solve some of our community's greatest issues. So I'll drop all of these links in the chat. And B Corporation also has a great anti-racism page that has a ton of resources that I'll drop in there too.
Can I follow you? Because I think one of the things really just powerful about this question about what is a B Corp, which is, and the most important thing is that it is a legal entity, right? So for the first time, we have businesses who are allowed to actually organize themselves around their values as opposed to shareholder profits. And I think what's so powerful is that that this has been an evolution, right? That it's and the journey that individual organizations, but I think specifically the ecosystem, right? That we have Conscious Capitalism, Bay Area, which Johanna is the chair, as well as Conscious Capital International. We have B Corp, we have Social Venture Network. We have all these networks and associations that in some instances started over 30 years ago. And let's be clear that anti-racism and dismantling white supremacy was not on the radar screen, right? So what I think is so powerful is the trajectory and the evolution that we see in recognizing the power and the leverage that individual businesses can have, but more importantly, how, again, series of people how we can move and ask for systemic and structural change within our economic systems.
Nice. Thank you for chiming in there, Andrea and Dr. Johnson. Anybody else want to share on that particular piece?
Sure.
Go ahead, please.
So Beneficial State Bank is a B Corp, as Andrea mentioned. And I've been thinking a lot about the term intersectional, certainly in the Kimberly Crenshaw meaning of it's one thing to be trans, it's one thing to be Black, it's one thing to be a woman, it's a whole other thing to be a trans Black woman. But I've also thought of intersectionality in terms of the various sectors in our money, capital, wealth system and how we have to change all of them at once. We have to shoot the moon because they're all solidifying white supremacy. They all need to be redirected to anti-racist strategies and commitments. And even within one organization like our bank, there are many areas of corporate activity that we have to manage all at once. The B Corporation regime helps us identify those and manage and monitor and track them. But I'll just give you 6 areas of banking that I think all banks need to change to be aligned with anti-racist allyship. And not to mention saving our planet and creating a robust, inclusive economy. So ownership and governance, in our case, Beneficial State Foundation, which is a public charity permanently governed in the public interest, owns all of the economic rights of the bank. One other shareholder, too, who also holds it in a charitable entity. So we need alignment in governance. Then in the lending practice, we think of banking as the original and most powerful form of crowdfunding because we're pooling our deposits, our idle cash, to finance the future that we wish to live in. That's what banks use on a 10-to-1 basis with their equity capital to make loans. So heaven forbid that we should be lending to private prisons, extractive finance, or fossil fuels. We want to be lending to what will sustain us as a society that's fair and just. Then same with the investment practice, that we divest from harmful activities and we invest in positive ones. Then corporate practices in general, we have a beneficial employment practice, just one of many corporate practices where we pay everyone 150% of living wage, because that's what it takes to sustain an adult with one dependent. Desperation is expensive for everyone in society, and we are underpaying the American workforce, something awful. We also manage our landfill, water and carbon footprint to get better every year. And then transparency. We tell everybody everything that we're doing. It's all published on our website. We have an annual impact report because we need to hold ourselves accountable to the public trust. And they tell us when we're not doing the right thing. And then lastly, advocacy. It's time to end the self-serving lobbying of the corporate powers who get to write their own rules in favor of profiteering, really, and away from any sort of public accountability.
Wow, that was yeah, super powerful. I think when you bring up transparency, it leads me to this notion of we've heard corporate responsibility without corporate accountability. And so with that, Dr. Johnson, as we work towards a more just and equitable society, what role do our individual stories play in cultivating connection, healing, and progress? Can't hear you, Diane.
So I'm so glad you asked that really thoughtful question, because I think one of the things that's so critical is that understanding that we are operating at the individual level, and then within our team level, within a particular department, within an organization, within an industry. So the metaphor that I so often use are the Petrushka Russian nesting dolls, and that the smallest doll is encased with a larger doll and a larger doll and a larger doll, and so that there's a level of profound and deep relationships across the different dolls, as well as how we are living our values and engaged in purpose. And so I think that the what we can do at an individual level, and I think this has been revealed so much in the last 15 months that we are living in, is the fact that our interior life, right, that our life of and how I'm going to interrupt myself. There's a really extraordinary model of consultants, which I'm one of, where we're really looking at the intersection of contemplative practice and the internal work. And what deep equity talks about is that we can't, or not that we can't, but it is practically impossible to do systemic change work because systems are made of individuals. So therefore that requires us as individuals not to only be what I would say performative, like how many of us have experienced virtue signaling, you know, and like the woke police, right? I mean, and that speaks to genuine and authentic exploration and interrogation of our lived experiences that shape our behaviors, that shapes our norms, that shapes our perspectives, that then connects us to how we actually are acting. So that the move to a more inclusive, diverse, dynamic, thoughtful, equitable economy requires us to interrogate. It is not only intellectual. It's what happens all the time. That this work, as great as it is for us to read lots of books and to watch lots of different YouTube and TED Talks, but that it is actually the challenging work of exploring and examining our lived experiences and how we operate and how we have been operating in the world, that opens the door, that opens the entryway for us to then think about what am I responsible for? How can I be accountable to changing the world? And what power do I have in my family, in my workplace, that then leads to the stacking of change?
Yeah, and there's a story, Dr. Johnson, that you reminded me of really quickly, of a dog named Fred. Fred was good at biting people. Everywhere Fred went, Fred would bite somebody, and so the post person came into the yard. Fred ran outside and bit the post individual delivering the mail, and so the postman decided that he was going to take the owner of Fred to court. And so they went to court, and what the owner did was put a muzzle on Fred and took Fred to court. So Fred in court couldn't bite anyone because Fred had a muzzle. Fred couldn't bite. So Fred was just, couldn't do anything because Fred had a muzzle. But on the inside, Fred was still mad. Fred was still angry. Fred was still mean. And Fred still wanted to bite folks. Here's the challenge. We have behavioral modification and not inner transformation. So we have the check boxes of folks that appear that they're doing these things and that there's systemic change and that there are this, that, and the other. But on the inside, where you talked about the core, the internal work, there's still a lot of masking and covering that's happening. And if we could just stay on that track really quickly, Dr. Johnson, can you just share one of your lived experiences, and then some of the things in your own, at least one of the things in your own work that has gotten in the way of some of that change that you want to see in the world?
And I'm actually going to pass the question off to Johanna, because I don't know if Johanna has shared with us yet. So I'm going to ask you to answer that same question, and then. All right.
Sounds good.
So, and just so I'm answering the right question, will you repeat it for me, David?
Sure. The question is, what have you experienced or observed in your own journey to actualize an intersectional anti-racist future?
Yep.
And then if you wanted to kind of dig deeper into that, what facilitates or gets in the way of that?
Yeah. So let's see, I've got a lot of experiences of it. I am a cis queer white woman. So I don't have all the experiences, but I have been an advocate since college. And the thing that comes to mind, top of mind for me, is when I took over the board presidency for the Bay Area chapter of Conscious Capitalism. And we were an organization that was really committed to business as a force for good in the world. And this was about 2 years ago. I started looking around saying, we're mostly white folks. There's mostly white folks in the international organization. And I had just come back from the annual conference, back when we could do that. And looking around, and there were not a lot of people of color. And it was not the first conference that I've experienced that. And it was deeply disturbing to me. So when I took over as board president, one of the things that was first and foremost, one of my top 3 priorities was to center DEI work, education, and anti-racism education. And we were, I think, one of the first organizations and it was a year ago this month, that we had an anti-Asian racism panel discussion because of the sudden backlash of anti-Asian racism in the Bay Area because of the coronavirus and how it was being characterized. So I think one of the things that gets in the way, to piggyback on what Dr. Diane said, is this inner contemplation that we have. It's more than a contemplation. I think in order to really make a difference, we have to understand that everyone in this system has been impacted by trauma, by the trauma of white supremacy, regardless of the color of your skin or your class or any of that. We all carry deep trauma from this lived experience. And I think one of the things that gets in the way is not acknowledging that, either as an individual looking at what can I do to settle my system so that I'm not responding from that hijacked limbic system doing the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. What can I do to settle myself inside myself so that I can respond and not react? So I'll pause there and let other folks chime in. I can see a lot of heads nodding.
Anybody want to jump in there?
I think that one thing that is related to that is one of the way the challenges is the cognitive, the dissonance between knowing that a system is profoundly broken, or you're on a spectrum of realizing how a system is profoundly broken. Because I can imagine Kat has any number of stories about folks who don't think that anything is broken, right? Like, what's wrong? Like, the economy is supposed to be about making money for a particular portion of the people. So, like, we still have folks going, there's nothing wrong, and the illusion that somehow the economy is neutral, right? Like, so that's a whole other panel, right? But there is this dissonance between, as people are on this journey, understanding that there's something profoundly broken with the system, and their sense of their lack of a sense of agency about how do they as individuals actually impact the scale of the system, right? And so I think so often there is, and also on top of it, the experience of dominant culture and white fragility in that is about discomfort and the inability to sit with the discomfort that is related to how as we are dismantling the system, how do we deal with the array of emotions and the array of experiences that we have, anywhere from fragility to exhaustion as being a BIPOC person, and the emotional labor that you're engaged in, where you're trying to be involved in your mission-driven work, and constantly having to deal with just living while being, BIPOC, being a woman, being a trans person, being an LGBTQ, the array of social identities, right?
I think with that, and Kat, I'm going to address this one to you, and thank you all for sharing so far. Within the context of community economic development, like what sort of organizational structures or investments can really move the needle and impact our community now in meaningful ways?
Well, starting by recognizing, well, first I'll recognize that I'm a white woman of privilege, deeply impacted by, I will shout out to a couple books, but White Fragility and Decolonizing Wealth. And, you know, to Dr. Johnson's point, we have to awaken ourselves to our complicity in racist systems as well. So I acknowledge my own and my responsibility to try to change them. But we've all been impacted by racist systems, and the economy is one of the most brutal, drives huge societal outcomes, more than probably anything else, including government or philanthropy. And we refuse to change it in the main. Notwithstanding the wedge, the trajectory of change that B corporations represent, 4,600, I think, worldwide, maybe more by now. Preponderant business leadership is a race to the bottom, adverse natural selection, where you get leaders who will do absolutely anything that isn't illegal, and maybe some that is, to maximize profit. And so we utterly reject the notion that in a capitalist market economy, the purpose of the corporation is to maximize shareholder value. But we're going to have to rewrite rules and change culture in our economy. So I've been thinking, I mentioned before, about all the tools available to us. We certainly need to reform our economy. But we also need to look at philanthropy. It's a system of concentrating wealth. And we need to look at government, which is largely bought by corporate interests. And we need to look at our social enterprises as the mainstream business form, not some sort of extracurricular. But I'll just jump ahead to the chapter I'm on, having been on an arc of serve on a lot of boards, create a bank or ranch venture funds that are, in this new image, work on philanthropy reform, work in policy and legislation, politics, whatever. I've actually come to the position that we're not going to fight our way out of racial inequity and structural racism unless we give assets back. So grant making doesn't move the needle enough, and it reconsolidates wealth in the main, and it's passed down for generations. So we actually took and were part of proposing what's called the Good Life Pledge, which is a pledge to shift at least a third of the assets under your control to community control and ownership during your lifetime. We have to give these things back. Wealth, assets, land, community amenities like energy plants and open space, because they were stolen from disinvested communities in the first place. And this triggers a lot of people because it looks like reallocation of wealth, which is exactly what it is. And that was made taboo by falsely affiliating it with only communism or things like that. But I think it is high time for reparations, long overdue. Reparations writ really broadly. And I am so heartened at what's happened in Evanston, Illinois, the first legally passed reparations in the United States. It's a small but critical start. And I see other programs like universal basic income, universal basic assets as other strategies that we could deploy. But I think ultimately we have to get the rules right, but it's also a matter of cultural reinforcement. It has to become unacceptable to engage in racism or exclusion or economic persecution, and has to be lauded to be part of a just, equitable, prosperous world.
Kat, can I jump in? And I think this is so critical, because if we think about, again, the evolution or the journey around the conversation about reparations, right? When you said reparations, was it 35 years ago, 40 years, people looked at you and it literally was like, oh, those extremists, right? Like how folks could barely, I think, conceptualize. And that was, I think, because we didn't have a systemic, there weren't enough people having a systemic analysis about how imbalanced and inequitable the system was, right? And so what's so exciting is in, you said, universal living wage, universal wage. We have pilot programs in San Francisco, right? I think there's a program also in San Francisco about giving a pilot program where they're going to give artists, a basic income. There was a couple of weeks ago, Mayor Libby Shaft piloted a program, which is the amazing work that was started by the brilliant mayor of Stockton. I think it's Stockton, right? And it's just, I think the movement, right, and it speaks to how we're like the waves of transformation happen, and that it is, I think, also this exquisite intersection about what people are doing, again, individually, to then move to how we think about it, to and the power of culture, right, and leadership, right, because I'll stop there because I can just go on for a long time.
All right, that's a big. I'm sorry, is somebody jumping in? Because I'm just moderating. I'm not trying to talk, but that's a big piece right there, because it's going to take collectivism. Like it's going to take all of us coming together in order to actually move the needle forward, right? So when we talk about business as a force for good, that is one of the ways that we come together to actualize this intersectional anti-racist future, right? So for folks of color, the thought sometimes can be so overwhelming and unimaginable, especially if we're carrying a lot of the load as individuals like yourself and other folks who are, in this work day to day operationally. And so one of the questions I have, and this is for the group, so we can just kind of have a conversation together, like what are some ways that we can bridge the gap so that we are stronger together in this work than siloed in this work?
I can jump in there a little bit, and I just want to backing off of what Kat and Diane also already shared as well. One of the things, I was actually on LinkedIn earlier today and saw that Target announced that today or yesterday that they're spending $2 billion with Black-owned businesses by 2025, right? So when I think about like using the power, using the privilege and the power that you have in this world for good and what that means for you, I've been I know that this whole panel is about the evolution of business as a force for good and how businesses show up, right? I have been doing a lot of research lately and questioning my own stuff about what do I expect from a brand and not expect from a brand. Now, I certainly don't want you to put up a black square and that now I feel like you're a part of this, right? I certainly want you to be authentic in how you show up. And maybe that doesn't mean that you're posting about the latest thing that has happened and how you have deep, you're standing in solidarity with XYZ, but you actually are putting something into action, Now, I don't know all of Target's, I don't know how they treat their employees. I don't know all the background of Target, but what I will say is that I appreciate, right? Like you used what you have in this moment to stand up. So they have said that they're not just trying to bring more brands in, but they're also helping Black-owned companies when it comes to their vendors, be it facilities or marketing or procurement, right? So they're using what they have to acknowledge that there's been a gap, and we're going to do what we already have the capacity to do to help fill that. So I think that as we all figure out how we show up, last year was extremely draining for me. Overall, just period. As a Black woman, it was very draining. I was very tired of talking about racism. I was very tired of talking about my perspective of it because it's like, well, I get to walk outside and live it. Like I get to see how my family suffers from wealth and health disparities, right? And so it's really hard to have that conversation. And there was a moment, this was an eye-opener for me. There was a moment when someone asked me to share. They're like, can you teach us how to not do that? Teach us how to be better. And I just sort of snapped in the moment. I was like, I am absolutely not teaching you. That is not my role. That is not my goal. you can go learn just as easy as the rest of us, you know, and I appreciate that you want to learn, but that's not what I'm here to do. So it really said, it took me down a road of what am I here to do then? What can I do, right? Which led me to sort of like where I am today. And one of my passions, and what I'm doing with Recruitique is figuring out how we put more and different people in charge. So I got that directly from Kat Taylor, and bless her, I say it every day. I wake up with it. It's my mantra. So Recruitique is a recruiting boutique. And so I'm looking at how do we put people of color in leadership positions, particularly in the financial services industry, but across every industry. So that's where I feel like my superpower can come from. And that gives me life instead of drains me. So I really feel like we all, each as individuals, have to hone into what are our skills, what are we passionate about, and how can we position that in a way that uplifts us and doesn't continue to drain us? Because I was seeing that, you know, my path was more draining in some ways than it was uplifting. So just sort of figuring that out along the way, I think is the best thing we can do.
Andrea, I think you mentioned something that's really important, but really relatively easy to do. And that's what Target did with looking at their supply chain. And how can you source diverse vendors and not just to help you with DEI, but who's doing your marketing, who's doing your website, who's making your containers for you, like all of that. I was on a panel a few months ago, and someone asked me, like, well, what about the pipeline problem? Like, let me just be really clear. There is no pipeline problem. The problem is with folks not taking the time to look outside of their immediate circle of influence. And the second you do that, you can find plenty of talent. So I think those are a couple of things that we can do that can help actualize this future. Look at your supply chain and look outside of your immediate circle for hiring.
I think it's actually, and I want to push this to, supply chain is critical, but I'm also thinking so much of, regardless of the industry that folks are in, and regardless of the size, right? Because there are so often like, well, we're just a company of 10 folks, so how do we diversify? And it's like, you can, right? Because I say this all the time, that diverse and inclusive and equitable organizations don't happen by accident, but neither do monoculture organizations. If you look around, your organization is all of the same, everybody looks the same, or there's a whole other panel about they might be various shades, but that's a whole other conference, right? But that and if you look around and the lived experience is still common, right? Everyone's gone to has the same educational experience, everyone has lived in the same regional area, then there is it's about making a commitment that you will intentionally say the picture of our staff and our employee picture needs to look different, and to deal with the discomfort that it takes to do that, instead of saying, oh, there's a pipeline problem, right?
So I travel with a set of first principles that's ever expanding that I learned from other people. And one of them is that put more and different people in charge. Another one is you don't get diversity unless you choose diversity. And diversity is a hallmark of natural systems. It's what makes them successful. So lack of diversity is also a giant opportunity cost for companies. They're missing the mark on management, on market sensing, on marketing, and these are markets that are now going to be dominated by decisioners who are people of color. So it just makes business sense at some point, but it's also the moral thing to do to transfer leadership in this country to more and different people. and exerting your business demand in favor of diverse supply chains, super important. I think that's fantastic of Target. It's actually central to what they do, and it's a way of building companies. But I also think there's a case to be made that corporations have an interest in making equity grants to diversely owned supply chain companies to stabilize their supply chain. And I don't mean the PayPal, we're going to invest $100 million in Black-owned businesses. You don't want PayPal in your capital stack. I'm sorry, PayPal, but you don't. Just give them the money, get out of the way, let them recapitalize these businesses because they've been shoestring developed in large part because of the stripping of wealth from diverse disinvested communities. And then I just wanted, David, you had asked about what I think of as sort of the solidarity question. Like, how do we not recreate concentrated wealth or divisiveness in this new just economy? I think it comes in part from preferencing collective ownership models. When everybody owns a little bit of everything, we thrive. When anybody owns too much of anything, we suffer. But it also means countering what white supremacy does so well, which is divide and conquer. The Southern strategy, what you see happening right now, trying to pit different constituencies against one another to weaken the opposition of white supremacy towards white supremacy. So it's like anything I can do to be part of, an allyship that does my own homework, does my own inner work, and shows up to create this collective equitable economy, I'm down to do.
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson. It's heating up. Go ahead,
so
jump in there.
What can we do that is going to help business leaders and folks who have leverage and influence to understand that? Because we also don't have a lot of time, right? So to me, that is always the question. It's like, what is it? Because right, we're speaking to the converted, right? But it's almost all the people who are not at this conference.
Yeah.
What's the entry point? What's the access point that will move the transformation faster, deeper, wider?
Yeah. Well, so I'll borrow from the theory of change at Beneficial State Bank about three trajectories that businesses care about deeply. The first is consumer movements, what Andrea was talking about. What are the brands that you shop affiliated with? And those can be very powerful, like Dakota Access Pipeline protests, where deposits fled out of the biggest banks because they were financing that pipeline. Then regulatory or rulemaking relations. I propose that no banks get FDIC insurance unless they lend 60% of their money into LMI communities. Why should we give that privilege to these other banks that are essentially very large hedge funds competing unfairly against real hedge funds with a very low cost of capital? And then industry relations. And this is where some cultural norms can help. Bank of the West just agreed not too long ago to divest from fossil fuels and pay all their employees $15 an hour. And they did that because it's a marketing advantage for them. I hope they did it for moral reasons too, but it is definitely infused in all of their narrative about why you should choose Bank of the West. Even HSBC, which is one of, honestly, the worst actors in the banking system, numerous violations in law, came to us on the West Coast because they were losing the investment business for young professionals who don't want to be affiliated with HSBC's practices. And the head of the wealth division had gone to a conference where they talked about the importance of sustainability to these new millennial markets. He went home to his dinner table with his wife and two teenage daughters and said, I just heard about this thing, sustainability. Do you think I should pursue it at HSBC? And his daughters and his wife said, if you did that, we'd be proud of what you do. Pregnant pause.
Wow. I think if I can add a fourth thing to that, Kat, is for the folks who are maybe not totally sold on why they should do this, there are so many stats that show that having a diverse workforce, having diversity in your leadership, having diversity on your board, even if it's just women on a board, all of those three things all the metrics show that those companies significantly outperform their competition. So if all you care about is the bottom line, it's the smart business thing to do.
Yeah. It's difficult to have this conversation without exposing some of our larger community foundations that are just as tight with opening up to Black and non-Black people of color, as far as, like we talk about, I know not to use grants as a primary source, but the money is there to actually prepare our budding entrepreneurs to actively get into these pipelines where they don't have the money for licensing and product placement, so on and so forth, but they're not receiving their just due either. And I think that's just as critical in moving the needle forward with exposing the totality of the challenge, and not, corporations, we know they're the bad guys, but there are other players that can be more proactive in the fight for this anti-racist future. And so I want to jump one more question in here before we open up for folks in the chat. I'm not able to type for some reason, so I'll ask this question and then we'll open up for some Q&A really quickly. So with some of the solutions that we've talked about, how can we build these solutions while centering low-income communities of color at the same time? Because often the folks that we are serving are not at the table really talking about some of the challenges that they're experiencing right now while we're collecting data and while we're doing metrics reports and so on and so forth. So how can we center low-income communities of color around some of the solutions that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, I
that's
think
for
it's
anyone.
Related to both Kat and Johanna's point about what do we do as individuals in terms of where, so again, like where are we, our power of purchase, right? And where, and can we, make the decisions about going to the local owned, Black owned store, in Oakland, in Richmond, or wherever. So I think that's part of it. And I think, it's this thing about what are we in response to an individual low income person, but what are we doing in terms of systemically? So it is that, are we changing the criteria by which we're hiring individuals? Are we willing in our businesses willing to invest in development so that we can identify and select talented people, but that might need training to then move them into better jobs? So I think it's just one example.
And I think another is, the phrase that comes to mind is cultural humility for folks who look like me and my white husband, and this is really big in the nonprofit world, is coming into a community like Superman coming in to save the day, rather than coming in with curiosity and humility and asking the folks most directly impacted, what do you need? How can we help? What's going to move the needle in the fastest and biggest?
Yeah, I think it's also important, if I can throw a plug in there myself, is to make sure that we fund and support and keep open spaces like Evolve Oakland that are resourcing and supporting entrepreneurs of color, activists, artists in doing the work every day to provide development, training, resources, and the like to continue doing what they're doing. Again, I'm not able to type, so I'm asking everyone that is in the chat, pop a few questions in there so that we can gain some more wisdom from our panelists before we have to head out for today. Any questions in the chat?
David, there was a question from Wilson. Hi, Wilson. Wilson Riles, a stunning and awesome activist in Oakland, where he has a question about, does the establishment of public banks stimulate and instigate business turning toward the good? So I guess I'll throw that to Kat.
Yeah. So I'm in favor of public banks. I've been working on the Public Banking Alliance for a long time, and state of California has had several proposals. It's routinely opposed by the bank lobby for obvious anti-competitive reasons. It does need to be carefully done to protect the trust of any depositors or custodial funds from the state and so on. But I think it could change the landscape. It's been proposed for 350 years, and it's a high time that we considered it. I also see related to that, a comment in the chat about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, that rolled out counter to its intention. It actually reinforced concentrated power in the economy. A Beneficial State Bank has done almost $300 million of PPP lending, and 33% to nonprofits, 25% to women or minority-owned interests, and 90% of the companies had 20 or fewer employees, but that was the exception. So important to get public policy right in terms of distributing wealth more. And I was going to say, just quickly, community ownership trusts. We need to develop more of those so that everybody can have a small piece of an asset in their own community, and that will help them stabilize financially as well.
I see Rosie, forgive me for the pronunciation. How do you think Oakland is specifically positioned to lead a movement towards an inclusive economy?
I mean, I'm just going to answer a question for the very reason that CAT and Beneficial Bank is here in Oakland, that we have so, like anything from the profound history that Oakland has. So we have a historical and cultural foundations that support Oakland being a place where we can model and are modeling what an inclusive economy looks like, from banks like Beneficial to organizations like Evolve, from the cultural orientation and the social capital, the networks and organizations of nonprofits, not-for-profits, and businesses and artists, right? That here in Oakland, I think, is why we are so poised to really enact and embody an inclusive economy.
I want to see if we can do a closing round with each of you with the prompt question of, what does the future look like in your eyes?
I think about this a lot, so if it's okay, I'll chime in first.
Absolutely.
Despite all evidence to the contrary, if we watch the news on a regular basis, I think the future is so bright for us. I have so much hope that I, in my lifetime, will actually see an intersectional anti-racist future. And one of the things that gives me hope is the young people that will not stand for it. And they, the studies have shown that millennials, the younger generation, and women, we all care deeply about this. And we are at the point where we are insisting that our voices are heard, and we're voting with our wallets.
Andrea?
Alarm's still going. I'll drop mine in the chat, but thank you guys. It's been so nice.
Okay.
I want to go last because, as
Dr.
you know,
Johnson.
I'm going to read a quote. So, and I'm still looking for it. So I'm going to let Kat go, and then.
Okay.
Well, the future belongs to the optimist, and I am definitely an optimist. So I'm banking on a transformation of the American psyche for people, especially young people, to realize they want to be part of the solution. And I think for an intergenerational solution, those of us with more years should hop on board to putting those young people in charge and supporting them any way we possibly can, especially putting more and different people in charge.
So I'm going to end along with the 10 million other people who found this poem absolutely extraordinary. So it's an excerpt from Amanda Gorman's just exquisite, stunning poem that she wrote. And if anybody has Apple Plus television, the Oprah conversation with her is fantastic. But we are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, conditions of people. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. So we seek harm to none and harmony for all. That's, yeah.
That was beautiful. I believe our time is just about up. I want to I want to thank every person, Johanna, Andrea, Diane, Kat, all those who are in the chat for joining this conversation as we all collectively do our work to actualizing an intersectional anti-racist future. It's more than actualization. It's not unimaginable. We're gonna get there. We're gonna achieve it. It's gonna be our reality. We're gonna set up a world that works for our children, our children's children, our children's children's children.
Thank you, everyone.
And so thank you all for planting those seeds.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful rest of the day.